Good afternoon. This morning, at least in American terms, this morning, I gave the keynote address, the final keynote address of the wonderful conference dedicated to actors, networks, and agents. Unfortunately, we had a bit of a technical issue with the recording. So this is an attempt to recreate at least the lecture part of the keynote for the, let's call it posterity. It is a great honor to have been invited to speak at this conference, and it is an interesting experience to write this lecture because instead of centering my work on the transnational networks of musicologists in the interwar years, as I have done over the past 8 years or so, this last year saw me turn towards an individual. The harpsichordist, composer, teacher and recording artist Wanda Landowska, a displaced woman-identified queer musician of Jewish-Polish descent. As I reread the abstract that I had sent to the organizers of this conference more than 2 years ago, it seemed to me at first that my current work might be somewhat at odds with the conference's topic. I had proposed then to explore how transnational musical networks can be anchored through individuals, shared repertoires, participation in expert communities, and various markers of identity. The entanglement of music and biography within the constitution of such networks, and the unique character of music as a sounding medium were to round out my reflections on the complex intersections of individuals and network. I had mentioned Landowska as well as Nadia Boulanger as network anchors and pointed to genre and gender among other nodes connecting the actors and agents of such a system. They were to serve, however, as brief case studies to make a bigger point, and as I started to write this presentation, I meant to stick to the original plan. Yet Wanda Landowska was having none of this. She is not going to be relegated to be simply a supporting actor in this keynote address. On the contrary, she will be its center. And I am not alone in this conference engaging with networks through an individual actor. We have heard about Landowska's contemporary, the soprano Aino Akti, composers Andreas Hallen and Aulike Rautavaara, and other musicians such as Swan Hennessy and Pierre Schaeffer, as they each interacted with institutions and networks. But what does this have to do with networks, actors, and agents? Why would I think about it from the vantage point of a single individual? And does this perspective offer a useful pathway for investigating the anchoring of networks and their intersection beyond this singularity? Could, in effect, a person-centered approach offer insights into the practice of networks that more systematic ones might not? These questions will guide me through this presentation. I will start with the singular vantage point of Landowska's musical life to think about networks, actors, and agents. In a second step, I will explore the methodological implications of tracing complexities through individual experience and other more theoretical reflections on thinking about networks as lived practice. 80 years ago, in the 1930s, I could have started this section with the generally annoying sentence, Wanda Landowska needs no introduction. Today, however, the musician who was once world-renowned as the Empress of the harpsichord and the musical daughter of Bach might benefit from a brief biographical primer before I focus on her networks and their anchoring in more detail. Landowska was born in Warsaw in 1879 into a Catholic middle-class family which had converted from Judaism. She started piano lessons at the age of 4 and in her teens added counterpoint, and other compositional tools to her education. At the age of 16, she moved to Berlin to study composition with Heinrich Urban, who had taught Paderewski, among others. In 1900, she moved to Paris, marrying the Polish journalist, folklorist, and socialist rabble-rouser Henry Lev. There she discovered the harpsichord as her artistic medium and would soon become one of its most celebrated virtuosas. Her 1909 monograph, Musique Ancienne, established her as an authority on early music performance. In 1913, at the age of 34, she moved to the Hochschule für Musik in Berlin as the first musician ever to hold a professorship in harpsichord. A year later, however, World War I turned her into an enemy alien under house arrest, for Warsaw was then part of the Russian Empire. As the couple planned to return to Paris in 1919, Henry was mowed down by a car. It has not been established whether or not the deadly accident was a politically motivated murder, but Landowska never stopped wondering. Widowed, the musician moved to the French capital with her household that included not only her mother, but also Elsa Schonicke, her secretary and live-in lover. In 1925, after earning enough money through teaching, recording, and concertizing across Europe and the United States, Landowska bought a small country estate in Saint-Leu-la-Forêt, where she established her École de Musique Ancienne, her temple to early music, and one that others compared to Bayreuth. Among the signal achievements of this time is her 1933 recording of Bach's Goldberg variations on one of the two harpsichords, which had been made for her by the prominent manufacturer of pianos and other keyboard instruments, Pleyel and Company. What she considered her forever home was lost, however, in 1940 during the German invasion of France. In deadly danger because of her Jewish ancestry, Landowska fled with her former student and current lover, Denise Restou, to the south of France, and then in 1941 to New York, where she arrived on the day after Pearl Harbor. In the meantime, the infamous Sonderstab Musik looted the instrument collection and library she had been forced to leave behind in Saint-Leu-la-Forêt. Now in her 60s, Landowska lived for 8 years in New York City as a concert and recording artist before settling into another house in the country for the last decade of her life, this one in Lakeville, Connecticut, a well-heeled community known for its prep schools and summer music festivals. In 1959, Landowska died at the age of 80. As bare-boned as I try to make this brief introduction, you might already have identified some of the social networks linked to Landowska. That of Polish musicians at home and abroad, that of early music performers, that of musicians in exile, one centered on Landowska at Saint-Leu-la-Forêt, the professional networks of impresarios and recording studios, certain scholarly expert communities, and also the more subterranean connections of lesbian circles in Paris and of converted Jews in Europe. Beside these and other social networks, moreover, Landowska was also interconnected with non-human agents, whether recordings, radio broadcasts, instruments, or musical manuscripts, as well as institutions from the International Musicological Society to the various conservatoires where she studied and taught. Were I simply to treat Landowska as a case study in this context, she would indeed serve as an excellent access point to exploring networks, given the richness of her entanglements. Yet instead of centering the historical individual and their lived experience, such a focus would turn networks themselves into the main actor of my inquiry. I will explain in my final remarks why I have become critical of systematic thinking about networks, rather than focusing on historical others as entangled singularities. Before delving deeper into Landowska's world, however, I want to signpost 4 of the writers who have contributed to this shift in my thinking after recently rereading their works. Emmanuel Levinas and his uncompromising view of alterity, Judith Butler and her framework of the iterability and boundedness of social norms, Eve Kozowski-Sedgwick and her concept of reparative reading, and Adriana Cavarero and her notion of relational narratives that center on the who rather than the what of subjectivities. To explore the enmeshment, or to use a German word here, the Vernetzung of Wanda Landowska with the multiple intersecting networks I mentioned a few minutes ago, I will present 3 different moments of her life. As I will now draw on archived documents and other materials, it is time to open up my PowerPoint presentation. Now, this worked when we had the original, so let's see whether it works now as well. Oh dear. Here is Landowska in Paris in spring 1905. The up-and-coming artist had recently signed with the Société Musicale, the new concert agency established by the impresario and editor Gabriel Astruc. In February, she proposed to introduce something new into the world of early music by presenting a concert in sounding the history of the waltz, connecting repertoire with instruments in unfamiliar ways. Instead of the more familiar binary between harpsichord and piano, Landowska added a 3rd agent into the equation, the forte piano. You see that with the blue arrow. At least that was the plan. Unfortunately, things did not quite pan out that way, because the owner of the forte piano in question, Gustave Léon, the director of Pleyel & Company, would no longer make it available for Landowska's concert, and as the program in her archive shows, the forte piano had to be replaced by a mere piano. It was a significantly more famous musicians who had received exclusive use of the instrument that spring. Yvette Gilbert, who had just returned to Paris after a long and successful tour abroad, and who joined the new wave of modernist authenticity by reinventing herself as a performative mediator of historic French chansons. Landowska was devastated. She tried to get her agent Astruc to intercede with Léon in a letter in which she wrote, quote, Yvette Gilbert wants to steal the forte piano in order to plug it into her session at the same time as the harpsichord, unquote. It seems, however, that there were additional forces at play. 10 days before the planned waltz concert, Landowska had performed on the forte piano in a lecture with musical demonstrations that Léon presented at the Conservatoire des Arts et Métiers. Combining lectures, photographic projections, and performances of different instruments from theorbos to harps, the lecture made sonic history come alive for the audience. Landowska contributed by playing all 3 keyboard instruments, harpsichord, forte piano, and piano. Moreover, her selection on the forte piano was the same Schubert medley she had programmed for her own concert 10 days later. It is not possible to ascertain from the surviving documents when and why Léon changed his mind, but these events lay bare the perils and pitfalls of networks in Paris. Clearly, Landowska was enmeshed in the intersections of Parisian musical worlds, from early music to the lecture circuit. But just as clearly, she was positioned at their margins and could easily be sidelined. Her correspondence from this period reveals her craving to become the leading figure of early music in Paris, which made losing out to a celebrity interloper, as she saw Gilbert, all the more offensive. Landowska's loss of the fortepiano also is a prime example of how inanimate objects can become agents of change within these contexts. However, thinking about the networks and actors from the perspective of Landowska, by focusing on the who rather than on the what of her position, indicates that the young Polish harpsichordist was still working on finding her place in the city she now called home. My next moment takes us to August 1914 in Berlin. Landowska, now an internationally renowned harpsichordist, had moved to the imperial capital the previous year. Hermann Kretschmer, the director of the Hochschule für Musik, had lured the master musician, whom he addressed as Liebe and verehrte Meisterin, in his correspondence to Berlin to take over the inaugural harpsichord class. But with the outbreak of World War I, everything changed. That August, German nationalists accused Landowska of being an enemy alien. She responded with an open letter to the Berliner Tageblatt, one of the primary daily newspapers in Germany, explaining that she was not Russian. Quote, "Quite the contrary, I am a Pole. Whilst the German hatred of the Russian government is scarcely 2 weeks old, ours has lasted for at least a century." Unquote. Her proud, even violent claim that as a Pole she harbored generational hate against such foreign oppression of her country is borne out in her diaries as she followed the fate of her homeland. In mid-December, for example, she noted, quote, "Isn't it wonderful how every nation in the world wants to give joy and good fortune to our poor country? The Germans want to liberate us from the Russian yoke. The Russians are unwilling to permit us falling under the German boot, while Austria wants to give us an archduke. They growl over us, tear us apart. We are dismembered worse, yes, worse than ever before, and the kingdom itself is no more." Unquote. Despite the city's symbolic power as the erstwhile capital of the Polish crown, by that time it was the third largest urban center in the Russian Empire. Like many of her fellow Poles stranded in Germany during World War I, Landowska was therefore deemed a Russian subject and put under house arrest, even though she was allowed to continue teaching her class at the Hochschule für Musik throughout the 4 years of war, and as the war went on, to concertize sporadically in Italy and Switzerland. But she was cut off from performing in what she determined in a letter to Kretschmer as, quote, "all countries who were German enemies." This moment in Landowska's life throws the spotlight on an individual's network positions and their shifts, as pressure is borne on those networks by outside events. Now, Landowska herself was anchoring a transnational network of harpsichord performance and teaching in Berlin, and she was a highly respected member of the international expert communities dedicated to scholarship on European music of the 17th and 18th centuries. Her reputation, and I draw here on a concept theorized by Pierre-Michel Manger, so her reputation was built not only through her artistic activities, but also, and perhaps more so, through the value as both scholar and performer she had acquired within these networks. The standing was in jeopardy, however, as the war unraveled her entanglement in these border-crossing networks, cutting her off not only physically, but also intellectually. It did not help that another, different network placed her in danger. including the repeated police visits to her apartment because of her husband's suspected involvement with Bolshevists and other groups considered dangerous in the German Empire. These fissures created realignments of networks. Now Landowska was an enemy alien consulting with other enemy aliens. She was also a Pole who attended such events as tea at the Café Monopole, organized for, as she writes in January 1915, transient visitors and co-nationals. Her international involvement with musicology, she notes a few weeks later, quote, has been all shot up in the war, unquote. She craved news from friends back in Paris. When it came, it was often discouraging. André Pirot, she finds out, was deployed, quote, to the front line of battle, unquote. And Écorcheville, quote, has disappeared, and no one knows where, unquote. As she would learn a month later, Écorcheville had already been killed in action at that point, quote, I am destroyed, I will suffer much for this loss, unquote. I am dwelling on these wartime fractures, which were turning actual connections into phantom networks, because they led to slippages between the who and the what of Landowska's singularity. Nationality, social positions, and expert status could no longer be categorized as one or the other, but as overlays in positionality and identity. Given the increasing density of actors and agents in the networks within which Landowska became enmeshed, choosing another point in time to parachute into proves increasingly challenging for my narrative. I chose the year 1938 as my next moment to present to you, but I will focus on two places with overlapping networks, Cairo and Saint-Leu-la-Forêt. We first stop in Cairo, where Landowska started a concert tour through Egypt in February 1938. Accompanied by Ilsa Schönicke, she arrived in Alexandria on a Saturday, which meant that the customs offices were closed. The harpsichord needed the help of a certain Signor Donato, and you see Signor Donato with the harpsichord in the top left photograph on this slide. He was a member of the extensive Italian-Egyptian community, and he was needed as a mediator to allow for the release in a timely fashion of the harpsichord so that Landowska and Schönicke could make it to Cairo for their first concert of the tour. It took place at the concert hall of the Lycée Français du Caire, a French school tightly linked to the Jewish community in Egypt, with the artists staying in the Hôtel de Paris. Schönicke's letters from the Egyptian tour speak about the numerous expatriates who organized and facilitated this tour. One of them was Olga Kushnir, a former student now married to a Cairo businessman. Another key figure was Papazian, the main piano dealer in Egypt, and the representatives for Pleyel and Company. Many members in the audience were part of cosmopolitan interwar Egypt, and a good number had been familiar with Landowska, not only because of the many records of hers that were available to buy in Cairo and Alexandria, but also because they had attended her concerts in Saint-Leu-la-Forêt. If Schönicke's reports are to be believed, each concert was a major triumph, as was Landowska's Cairo radio interview. The vagaries of harpsichord transport made concert preparation somewhat stressful, but the instrument always arrived just in time to be tuned for the concert. The harpsichord also is at the origin for an anecdote Schönicke records. Before their departure for France on the 12th of March, Landowska herself accompanied the instrument to the customs office. After she spelled her name, the officer in charge exclaimed, "Oh, you are the Empress of the harpsichord," and asked for an autograph. On the day that Landowska returned to her home, she started telling her companions about what she had experienced in Egypt. And strangely, she launched into a violent tirade against the French composer and conductor Wanda. He had been in Cairo and in Ismailia around the time that Landowska was also there, heading a touring ensemble of about 100 musicians from the Opéra Comique. She described his performances as an under-rehearsed disgrace. Quote, "The Egyptians are no savages. The greatest artists, the greatest conductors perform there. How dare he?" Unquote. A week later, she returned to the topic even more angrily. What she did not mention, in any case, was that Anne and his troupe were on an official mission for the French government and performing exactly the repertoire he was charged with presenting. The start of his tour was coordinated with the opening of the 1938 exhibition of French arts and crafts in Cairo, an event sponsored by King Farouk I and the French president. The Cairo trip makes it clear that Landowska's reputation and her position across different networks, both Egyptian and transnational, were complicated. Clearly, she was fettered in Egypt, yet her concerts took place in smaller venues, even as they attracted an educated and cosmopolitan elite of Egyptians, expatriates, and officials, including the wife of the British ambassador. It is revealing that both Schoenicke and Landowska emphasized how many of the audience members had been regulars at the Saint-Lô concerts. These networks of admirers and former students then were anchored both through Landowska's artistic reputation and in the musical world she had created in Saint-Lô. One might describe her agency as generative with respect to these networks, and her attitude towards Ham as one of subaltern identification with highly educated foreign elites in the face of French officialdom. Moreover, here too, the harpsichord was an actor, both through its ontology as a playable instrument and as a material manifestation of Landowska's musical distinctiveness. Yet at the same time, the Polish musician's visit remained tethered to private and business initiatives. It was Han and his ensemble who were chosen as artistic emissaries of French music. And Landowska gained French citizenship only a few months later, on the 1st of June, 1938. Landowska returned to Saint-Lô-la-Forêt in early March with a growing sense of precariousness. As a musician who identified ethnically as Jewish and who faced anti-Semitism throughout her life, Landowska was attuned to the increasing dangers. Friends and family, especially her younger brother André, started pushing her to leave France for the safety of the United States, but she adamantly refused. The news from Jewish friends and colleagues abroad was dire. Alice Ehlers spoke to her about becoming homeless twice, first in 1933 and then again in 1938 with the Anschluss of Austria. In Czechia, colleagues such as Leo Kastenberg saw the writing on the wall. As Landowska commented, quote, "I think about all the Jews who have already been chased from Germany and who now tremble in Prague. My God, it is frightening," unquote. The diaries that her close confidants kept at Saint-Lô-la-Forêt registered every time bad news reached their pastoral enclave. At the end of March, Landowska exclaimed, quote, "I believe that all those of Jewish origin should become Jews again," unquote. And yet, Despite the events across Europe, life went on as before with concerts, musicological research, teaching and recording. An amateur video from 1927, which is the only audiovisual, actually mostly visual with audio added, source at all from Saint-Leu-la-Forêt, otherwise we just have photographs. That video, it's an amateur homemade video, gives us some idea of the hospitality and the excitement of the concerts and lectures organized by Landowska and her circle. It's just a minute and a bit. At the end of the video, you're going to see Elsa Schönicke walking down the stairs with the cakes in her hand. I'm very sorry about the quality of that video, but even the version on YouTube is pixelated. It's the best we have. Why did Saint-Leu-la-Forêt matter this much? Besides being the only home Landowska ever owned, and one she shaped into exactly what she desired, from carefully chosen furnishings to the concert hall she would build, it was a place that, in terms of network analysis, served as a node, crossing point, and anchor to numerous groups, some very openly advertised, others hidden, but deeply important. The estate of Saint-Leu-la-Forêt itself could be seen as a gynocentric musical mirror to the literary salon that Natalie Clifford Barney hosted in the Rue Jacob in central Paris, and that was, in Sylvia Cahan's words, perhaps the most open bastion of lesbianism of the epoch, unquote. Between 1911 and 1913, Landowska had lived in 24 Rue Jacob, 2 houses down from Barney, and been a visitor to and performer at her salon. In 1911, for example, Landowska participated in an 18th century themed event where she played couperin on the harpsichord in the course of an indoor-outdoor June fete. On the grounds of Barney's property, a small building dating from the early 19th century with a Greek facade and the inscription à l'amitié served after extensive renovation as the location for her salon, where musical entertainments and lavish hospitality merged into convivial experiences. Landowska's calendars note visits with Barney, such as a tea in May 1922. Landowska herself features in Barney's famous drawing, Le Salon de l'Amazone, where she takes place of pride in a group of musicians gathered at the top right corner. Barney's blending of artistic enterprise and gynocentric lifestyle can be seen echoed in the way Landowska organized life and musicking in Saint-Leu-la-Forêt, where close female friends and students constituted an inner circle around which various sets of musicians, patrons, musical entrepreneurs, Polish compatriots, and musicologists were grouped. The interconnection between Barney's and Landowska's circles was embodied not least in the person of Barney's life partner, the Duchess Elisabeth de Gramont, who would become a regular visitor to Landowska's own temple to art in Saint-Leu-la-Forêt, attending not only public concerts, but also dropping by for tea and private harpsichord recitals. From the outset, two spatial elements were intertwined in Landowska's project. Locally, she created her ideal environment with her home concert hall and gardens. Globally, she conceived of her enterprise as a magnet for a transnational community of musicians, scholars, and music lovers. Already, when she traveled on concert tour to the United States in 1925, she advertised a first course that she would be teaching in Saint-Leu in the fall of 1926. She also used her network of well-known musicians and critics to promote her activities, both nationally and perhaps more importantly, internationally. Once the concert hall was built, reports of the inaugural concert appeared not only across the French press, but also in Europe and the United States. It is therefore no surprise that her Egyptian audience, 12 years later, in 1938, included a number of patrons familiar with Landowska's Temple of Music. In between local and global connections, Saint-Leu-la-Forêt could also be described as a place where Polish expatriates could meet with their well-known and distinguished compatriot. It is perhaps worth noting that many of the Polish regulars at Landowska's home were, in effect, Catholic converts of Jewish descent, such as the poet and music critic Leon Kosznecki. It is fitting in that context that one of the final concerts at Saint-Leu-la-Forêt in June 1938 was dedicated to Polish music. It was not planned to be one of the last concerts. The 1939 concert season was already thought to be happening, but it had to be cancelled because of what happened in the world. So the 1938 concert with Polish music was I think it was the penultimate concert. Landowska was delighted that all of Polish Paris was enthusiastic because of it. Although not a central agent in the large Polish community of interwar Paris, Landowska nonetheless was a highly respected figure who represented her country of birth in concerts not only of Polish cultural outreach, but also in fundraising when in early January 1940, she appeared with Bronislaw Huberman in a concert in support of the French and Polish air forces. But a few months later, Landowska would lose Saint-Leu-la-Forêt as she fled to the south of France, just ahead of the invading German army. She recalled her last night at her temple to early music as one opening a wound that would bleed for a long time and barely ever scar over. I could easily have spent more time honing in on other moments in Landowska's life, including her traumatic arrival in New York City in December 1941, and then her shadow recreation of Saint-Leu-la-Forêt in her rented house in Lakeville, Connecticut. But we have already spent quite a bit of time in the company of one distinguished musician and her singular enmeshment in various personal and professional networks. In this second and final part of my presentation, I propose reflecting on what an epistemological shift in perspective might tell us about actors, agents, and networks when understood as and through the lived experience of one individual. I do not propose any earth-shattering new theories. Rather, I propose to tweak some of the thinking about networks by introducing the work of such post-colonialist feminist thinkers as Bernadette Vicuña González, who emphasizes the need to focus on the particularities of stories that are, quote, narrated just off the axis of power, unquote. This epistemic strategy demands the focus on an individual's, quote, biographical evidence in order to uncover how structures of prominence are entwined with processes of marginalization, unquote. The trifecta of gender, sexuality, and race serve as a fulcrum for this theoretical pivot. Indeed, feminist and anti-racist critics have started to recenter lived experience on the singular individual, rather than subsuming them into heuristic categories, thus refusing easy narration and instead teasing out the interrelations of systems of power and individual lives and bodies. This strategy uncovers the ways in which especially women-identified individuals have been erased, if not entirely, then with respect to their agencies as they navigated the currents of history. The entangled matrix of singularity and collective, as Shauna Redmond has shown so powerfully with respect to Paul Robeson's musical Mediation. This entangled matrix opens pathways to exploring musical networks through a reparative agenda. Let me return here briefly to the well-known conceptual pair of paranoid and reparative analysis and how it might connect to thinking about individuals and networks. Critical analysis of sociopolitical systems, especially one that emphasizes injustice and erasure, often falls into a mode that Paul Ricoeur identified as the hermeneutics of suspicion. Suspicious interpretation, or to borrow Eve Kosowski-Sedgwick's term, paranoid reading strives to unmask systems of oppression and therefore holds a valuable place in scholarly activism. Such paranoid approaches can be seductive, given paranoia's tendency to place, and this is Sedgwick, an extraordinary stress on the efficacy of knowledge per se, knowledge in the form of exposure. Maybe that's why paranoid knowing is so inescapably narrative, unquote. Yet paranoia also carries dangers of feedback loops and solipsism, as Sedgwick and Rita Felsky have asserted, the infinite regress of turtles, all the way down. Integrating other, more reparative forms of knowing embraces the protagonist as a figure with agency, one who is more than a cipher in a story centered on revealing their inevitable enmeshment with and subjugation through oppressive systems. Sedgwick writes of disruptions, of temporalities, and of hope that can emerge when, quote, the reparatively positioned reader tries to organize the fragments and part objects she encounters or creates, unquote. By crafting a reparative web of affiliation through a caring engagement with a singular individual, I, as the mediator of the story, to reference one of Antoine Enion's key concepts, as a mediator, I can thus pay attention to the who, often in the end unknowable other, rather than the what of their subject position. As Suzanne Cusick pointed out in her work on Francesca Caccini, such reparative strategies consider the narrative's protagonist as, quote, persons whose stories and artistic work are inevitably rooted in and shaped by historically and culturally specific, gendered and classed experiences of the material and discursive world, unquote. This perspective calls for taking the historical other seriously, for listening to their own voices instead of overwriting them with our interpretations, for approaching the other with love, in the sense argued by the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, where the other retains their alterity in a relation that is thus ethical. This loving or caring perspective is radical, for it acknowledges that the other self is unknowable. Even if, as Simone de Beauvoir reminds us, the way in which Levinas positions the other as the eternal feminine is nothing short of, quote, an affirmation of masculine privilege, unquote. But there is still a lot to learn from Levinas. Indeed, caring engagement with the unknowable other from a feminist position then demands dealing with historical woman-identified musicians on their own terms, taking seriously their joy and creativity in sound, whatever iterative pressures and constraints they may have faced in their times. Such loving care for historical others does not mean that I must personally like them. Indeed, I personally am ambivalent about Landowska, given some of her more abusive behaviors towards her lovers and students. It does mean, however, to return to Cusick's feminist project, working on reconstructing a vivid and relational past, quote, so that readers can both imagine a world very different from their own and imagine their own relationships to these ancestors whose stories they have not known before, unquote. What does this evocation of a reparative heuristics have to do with the actors, networks, and agents to which our conference is dedicated? Do we risk a return to the great man narrative now in drag through the back door? After all, one of the most important agendas of network theories from ANT to CHAT has been to emphasize the relationality of production, distribution, and consumption, whether intellectual, artistic, or material, and to provide a tool to understand what Benjamin Pickett has termed a, quote, historical ecology, wherein relations are the units of analysis. He italicizes relations. Or to connect my relational construction of singularity to another important concept proposed by Ennio, one of attachment, to a multiverse of, quote, objects of concern, of care, of passion. The stories that I have just centered on Landowska lead me to suggest an approach to the interweaving of singularity and networks that anchors analytical discourse with the individual. In the case of Landowska, it enables a granular understanding of networks wherein attachments form, change, and stop over time as the musician herself develops both personally and professionally. Some of the social networks connected to Landowska in 1905, for example, overlap with those that she's involved with in 1938. But she no longer is a young emerging artist, but rather an international celebrity. By approaching a network constellation through the individual rather than the structural, the macro, such as geopolitical developments, and the micro, from aging to gender identities, lose their narrative hierarchies into a rhizomic interconnected web. It allows also for concepts related to individual creators, such as artistic reputation, to be examined in terms of networks. What centers this kind of network analysis is what mattered to the protagonist, and what mattered to Landowska in 1905 as a young woman may or may no longer matter to the mature and successful artist of 1938. What I propose then, when emphasizing the anchoring of networks as a lens of analysis, is a radical inworlded singularity as the agent anchoring the networks. Such a figure is not a case study that opens access to and understanding of networks, but rather the embodied ontology and lived practice of networks created through their entangled presence. Thank you very much.